Sometimes the truth hides in numbers, not in words. I say that without drama, just as someone sets a glass of water on the table and waits for the other person to recognize thirst. Everything that happened with Charlotte and Emily could be summed up in two columns: debits on one side, credits on the other. On the left, mortgage, taxes, repairs, the steady drip of maintenance. On the right, rents flowing in each month like a half-kept promise. The problem was that Emily always kept the promise, and Charlotte got the bill. Louisville has a way of staying quiet about domestic injustice. The river keeps moving, the wind stirs the leaves in Cherokee Park, the lights along Bardstown Road blink open and shut in slow rhythm. Outside, the city behaves as if everything is fine. Inside, in that old brick building on Eastern Parkway, nothing was. I'm no judge or priest. I'm an accountant, a colleague of Charlotte's in a mid-sized firm overlooking the I-65, where the windows hum whenever a truck rolls by. The first time I saw her, I had the impression she'd already filed half her life away in manila folders, each labeled with careful, slightly slanted handwriting. Some people manage their fear by organizing it. That was her way. We worked at desks divided by a single panel. Our friendship was never epic: shared coffees, easy silences, dry jokes about clients who swore that cash was invisible if it never touched a bank. Enough, but never more than that. I learned about Emily later, through photos. She's the kind of person who believes light belongs to her. Selfies on the Big Four bridge, bronzed legs on some rented yacht that could have belonged to anyone, bourbon glasses on trendy rooftops in Nulu, perfect nails beside a plate of hot brown captioned, "Doesn't count as carbs if you post it." And in the background of those curated lives, the building. A tired two-story complex near St. Matthews, its brickwork worn thin, an elm tree offering too little shade in summer. The property was in both their names, a joint inheritance from an uncle, the kind that sounds like a blessing until accounting lays bare who pays the bills and who flaunts the ocean. The family agreement, if one can call it that, was the kind of trap spoken in gentle tones. "Charlotte, you'll handle the mortgage, property taxes, call the plumber when Tubi floods, deal with the PVA when the valuation comes off. Emily will handle the social side, find tenants, coordinate payments, promote the apartments online, give the business a modern face." In practice, the social part meant quietly pocketing the profits. 2 full years, 24 months during which Charlotte paid the dues like counting rosary beads, trusting that each cleared balance might bring her a little peace. That faith cracked one drizzly Friday, the kind of day when the Watterson Expressway looks like a sad ribbon of mercury. I'd stayed late finishing an audit and saw Charlotte's office lights still on. I knocked on the doorframe. She didn't look up. "How long have you been paying everything yourself?" I asked, not to pry, just expecting her usual half-smile that meant don't worry. Instead, she placed a thick bundle of papers on the desk, bound with 2 rubber bands. 24 months, she said. This is everything. Mortgage, interest, taxes, insurance, repairs. And this, she added a thinner folder to the right, these are the tenants' transfers to Emily. In accounting, when someone hands you that kind of evidence, the air takes on the chill of a hospital ward. A person's story reduced to amounts and dates. In the thin folder, screenshots bore tiny captions, "Thanks for the receipt, M, payment 2A, December." Most were direct transfers to an account Emily used for her influencer work, deposits labeled as creative services or sponsorships, rents mixed right in. All the money swept into the same tide. Do your parents know? I disliked how that sounded. Charlotte leaned her elbows on the desk, rubbing the bridge of her nose, as if fatigue had lodged a thorn between her eyes. They know what's convenient to know. My mother calls it helping your sister get her start. My father keeps saying the building doesn't pay for itself, and since I'm good with numbers, it's only natural that I understand. She said understand like naming a chronic illness. I understood. 2 years. The break didn't come as a single fracture, it was a constellation of small cracks. The 1C doorbell that never worked and had to be replaced. The rust-stained pipes. A tenant, a professor from UFL, who fell 2 months behind and left an envelope of counted bills and a poem in the mailbox. Charlotte never charged the late fee. That same weekend, Emily posted from Miami, a top-down photo of breakfast, comment section full of hearts. "My life is hard work and sunshine," she wrote. I saw it on Charlotte's phone, not because I was snooping, but because she placed it between us, as if to set down an uncomfortable truth too heavy to hold alone. Louisville gets low skies sometimes, and that winter they hung heavy, the color of wet cardboard. One afternoon I walked the complex with Charlotte. The shared laundry smelled faintly of cheap detergent in damp air. The sun was sinking behind the rooftops. In old Louisville, not far off, the tired Victorian houses stood in rows like weary soldiers, stained glass windows that had witnessed too many uneasy dinners. In the parking lot, Charlotte spoke the word audit with the tone of someone done negotiating with self-deception. "The IRS flagged a review. I've got everything documented. Emily hasn't reported a single dollar of the rent. She says they're collaborations, that tenants prefer paying her on Venmo because it's more cool. She called me yesterday. Wants me to align my books with hers. She wants me not to declare the building's income. Says the auditor won't notice. I saw her profile outlined against the dull color of sunset. I thought of the cranes at Waterfront Park lifting lights for some event, of Churchill Downs standing empty, of the old scent of wood and a horse in its stall chewing slow straw, indifferent to human drama." "And are you going to do it?" I asked. Charlotte gave a humorless laugh. "No. And I'm not paying the property taxes this year either. Let her do it. Let her feel what it's like when the county calls." Her refusal was the first decision that returned her to herself. It might sound small, but it was decisive. In our city, property taxes are collected with a strange mix of patience and threat. Never violent, just persistent. If you don't pay, the shadow of foreclosure begins to appear on the wall, like the outline of someone watching you from another room. Charlotte knew that. They wouldn't act right away, but the message was clear: the invisible games were over. The news spread through the family the way bad news always does, no clear departure date, but astonishing speed. Her mother called her to the house, one of those old ones near Frankfurt Avenue, with tulip-shaped lamps and black and white photos of ancestors wearing the kind of seriousness that once passed for virtue. "Don't make waves," she said, pouring tea as if tea could dissolve the problem. Emily arrived in an oversized white sweater and expensive perfume that filled the room in seconds. "We're in this together," she said. "We're family." Charlotte didn't answer. She simply set an envelope on the table, photocopies of receipts, statements, emails. Sometimes the only way to speak is to show evidence. Her father, a man with thick hands, retired from manufacturing, looked at Charlotte as if he could see through her. "You're the responsible one," he said. "You've always been. Your sister's creative, she doesn't understand these things." And there it was, the old manipulation, varnished with affection. Charlotte's competence, for them, was an inexhaustible resource, something to be drawn upon every time the mess needed cleaning. "We can fix it," the father offered, lowering his tone, as though fix it were a button on his chest. "You talk to the auditor. You both pretend it wasn't seen. Then Emily gets herself in order. Okay?" When Charlotte told me about that conversation, we were standing in our office parking lot, watching the red rectangle of the KFC Center glow in the distance like a neon heart. "I'm not fixing anything," she said. I nodded. "I didn't say I support you or I'm with you. I said something that sometimes means more, that makes sense." Then came the day of the audit. It's wrong to say anyone enjoys those moments, but for an accountant there's a strange comfort in the precision of things finally aligning with truth. The IRS office in Louisville doesn't impress: a hallway with carpet that's begged for retirement, chairs that squeak, the monotonous hum of the air conditioner. In the waiting room, a muted TV played landscapes nobody watched. Charlotte arrived on time, carrying 2 small boxes. Emily arrived late, with a large coffee and the attitude of someone negotiating a sponsorship deal. "This is insane," she whispered to me, as if I'd rearranged the cosmos just to expose her. The auditor was a man without hurry, wearing a cement gray tie, his humor surfacing only when he came across neatly arranged paperwork. He greeted them both, asked for IDs, and began with easy questions, stretching the joints of the conversation. Owners of the property? Yes. Rental income? Emily's silence, Charlotte's look, yes. He asked to see how the duties were divided. Charlotte explained, mortgage and taxes, hers. Rent collection, Emily's. The man didn't react. He simply said, documentation. Charlotte opened the first box. Inside were blue dividers marked by month. Maintenance receipts signed by contractors. Printed photos showing the apartments before and after repairs. Bank statements carefully underlined. Lease contracts with deposits noted. Every document labeled with its apartment number. The auditor nodded, marking details with a burgundy pen, reorganizing the pages into a neat pile to his right. The second box contained Charlotte's provisional filings, her deductions, and a comparative income versus expenses chart. Everything clear, cold, unadorned. When it was Emily's turn, she set a glossy folder on the table, her name embossed in gold, filled with loose pages stamped with her logo. There were chat screenshots with tenants, some transfers, some cash notes. One page had handwritten lines reading January, 3 payments surrounded by doodled hearts. No formal receipts. The auditor exhaled, the kind of sigh that comes from someone long past surprise. Did you report these earnings on your tax forms? Emily smiled slightly, as if a smile might still rescue her. Well, they weren't really earnings. It was a kind of circular economy. I reinvested that money to optimize the building's branding. She said branding as though the word itself could plaster over a legal hole. The man didn't raise his voice. He simply replied, the law doesn't recognize circular economy in this context. These are either rents, donations, or payments for services. In any case, they must be declared. Do you have receipts, invoices, or service contracts? Emily looked at Charlotte, as if hoping the floor might open a secret door. Charlotte met her eyes steadily. Much later, over a table on Frankfurt Avenue, Charlotte told me that moment was when she stopped being the designated responsible one. I saw it too, her spine seemed, at last, to take its rightful shape. The next minutes weren't dramatic. They were methodical, almost quiet. The auditor drew a chart with 3 columns, rental income received by Emily, based on screenshots and tenant testimony, property expenses paid by Charlotte, and the difference. He asked Emily to estimate any branding or promotion costs she wanted to deduct. Emily hesitated, tossed numbers into the air. 5,000, maybe. The man wrote unverified and continued. The issue wasn't whether Emily looked guilty or contrite. The issue was that, finally, the numbers were speaking. That was the real climax if the story needed one at all. A cold exposure, no script required. In Emily's eyes, I saw a clumsy realization, as though she just discovered that the stories we tell online don't pay bills, and the state doesn't put heart emojis in the corners of tax forms. There were no shouts. Only a single sentence. I thought, you had it, she said to Charlotte, almost in a whisper. Thought. Had it. 2 words that, in that order, summed up years of quiet manipulation. Charlotte answered with something so simple it doesn't need exact recollection. She said no. She didn't have it. She wouldn't have it again. We stepped outside, and the Louisville air carried the damp metallic scent the Ohio brings when it blows in from the bridge. We walked toward the parking lot. Emily trailed a few paces behind, fingers frantic over her phone, the white sweater now twisted around her body. On the sidewalk, a crushed cigarette butt and a coffee stain shaped themselves into a kind of map. The city went on, indifferent and old. The Big 4 bridge cut across the distance, its pale lights trembling. I felt like having a bourbon, not to celebrate, but as a ritual. That small warmth in the throat that helps you understand something has ended. Charlotte spoke about the property tax like someone recalling their first day off medication. I didn't pay it. I'm not saving her this time. I thought about the years before, the rhythm of payments she'd kept like answering a doorbell that wasn't hers. The decision, I knew, came with consequences, interest, county notices, the possibility of a tax sale if things dragged on too long. But the meaning was elsewhere. It wasn't revenge. Not even justice in the grand sense. It was a line drawn on the ground, marking where the exhaustion stops. Louisville is kind that way, it gives you places to think without interruption. In Cherokee Park you can walk an hour hearing only bicycles and dogs. Charlotte started going there in the afternoons. She told me without really meaning to, in an offhand phrase. She also began to sleep a little better. It wasn't a movie change, no redemption in Technicolor. It was in the details. She muted Emily's notifications. They spoke less. At her parents' house, the weekly dinners became monthly ones. Her mother sent messages with vague phrases, the kind people use when trying to grab smoke with their hands. Her father stopped talking about the building and started talking about the weather, a noble topic when you don't know what to do with the human part. The tenants, those quiet people who pay for the right to close a door and breathe, reacted with a mix of loyalty and embarrassment. Some called Charlotte for instructions. "Who do I pay now?" She gave them the new building account, untouchable, managed jointly by an independent administrator. The professor from UFL left another poem, this time on a small piece of paper, alongside a spotless receipt. "Thank you," it said, nothing more. He taped it to the laundry room door, as if he needed the word to hover there a while, visible to everyone. Emily vanished from the city for a while. I heard, through others, that she went west, kept posting pictures, sunsets on another coast, different breakfasts that all looked the same, cryptic captions about new cycles. The to-be rent came in late that month because the tenant still thought he owed Emily. "It's inertia," Charlotte said on the phone, and her voice already carried less fatigue. She did something that surprised me more than the audit. She bought a table. A long wooden table, the surface slightly uneven. "I want it for breakfast, facing the window," she said. It might sound silly, but in adulthood, when you buy a table just because, there's almost always a moral decision underneath. At work, Charlotte began talking about things she used to avoid. She told a story from the Slugger Museum about how her grandfather once took her as a child to see the bats and how they explained the exact ratio of the wood. "I didn't remember that," she said. "Lately I think a lot about what's made of good wood, and what's just sawdust with varnish." She didn't say it with bitterness, it was a technical comment on the consistency of life. The IRS carried on its process as it must, without spectacle. Notices went out provisional, then final. Emily had to pay what she hadn't declared, plus penalties. Payment plans, official letters, the steady machinery of consequence. The family met again, this time in a kitchen lit by midday sun, less solemn. I wasn't invited. Charlotte told me later, on a bench facing the Muhammad Ali Center, where tourists stopped to read quotes about fighting fair. Emily cried a little, said she was scared. The mother said the world was cruel to dreamers. The father, for the first time, didn't suggest a fix. He said, "I didn't know how to see." He said it to the air, not to anyone in particular, as if speaking to his own past. There were no cinematic hugs. Instead, a new sentence. Emily asked if Charlotte could help her get organized from now on. Charlotte breathed and said she could recommend an accountant, give her a list of what to keep, explain how a ledger works. Then she added that she wouldn't be responsible. She used that word exactly, responsible, the one they'd once hung around her neck like a weight. Now she held it lightly between her fingers, placing it where it belonged. Sometimes maturity is nothing more than putting the right words on the right shelves. The building slowly recovered its dignity. A painter fixed the entrance, changing the color from a tired brown to a pale green that caught more light. The mailboxes were repaired, a sign straightened. In spring, the elm gave enough shade for 2 cars. Charlotte hired a manager to handle tenant communication. She delegated. For her, delegation was a private act of forgiveness, a recognition of finitude. I've realized strong people struggle most with trusting a system outside their own fatigue. Louisville went on with its business. On Bardstown Road, the nightlife lit up with laughter that, from a distance, sounded like vibrating glass. On the George Rogers Clark Bridge, people stopped to photograph a bargain bin moon, and on the I-64, there was an accident every couple of weeks in the exact same spot, as if the city were rehearsing the same collective forgetfulness. In our office, the auditor from that day became a kind of respectful anecdote we retold with precision. No one gave him a nickname or exaggerated his gestures. I think it was our way of honoring something that, for once, had worked. As the months went by, Charlotte began to talk about the building the way one talks about an animal that no longer bites. "We're keeping up with it," she'd say. She told me she'd set up a small reserve fund, that it was the first morning in 2 years when the balance didn't scare her. I listened with the quiet satisfaction that comes when the numbers finally line up and the soul can stretch without tearing. When she finished, I said nothing, because there was nothing to add. Silence, sometimes, is the most accurate equation. One afternoon we sat by the river, on a bench we both knew. The Ohio carried along its unseen stories. Charlotte kept her hands in her pockets. "I don't know if I forgave her," she said. "That's not a binary thing." She smiled a little at using a term that belonged to us. "What I do know is that I stopped answering to her name when it wasn't an emergency. And I started answering to mine." That's what she said. I liked it better than any psychologized speech. Simple and vast. Emily resurfaced in the city, quieter. Fewer photos, more questions. She took courses, asked for invoices, learned to file receipts in plastic sleeves. Complained it was boring. "It is," I told her when I ran into her once on Frankfurt, outside a cafe. She looked at me like she couldn't place where she knew me from. I didn't insist. There were no awards to win in that conversation. At some point, we got the county's notice, property taxes overdue, with interest. The manager, at Charlotte's instruction, arranged a formal payment plan. Emily participated. They paid. They didn't lose the building. They didn't gain a fable to tell their grandchildren either. It was what it had to be, a cost accepted. I noted it mentally like a journal entry, debit to shared responsibility, credit to orphan guilt. Sometimes, at night, when I drive past Eastern Parkway and 3rd, I find myself looking at the buildings and thinking about the accounting stories sealed inside their walls. In every receipt someone kept dutifully, there's an invisible decision. In every late payment, a private shame. In every timely no, the chance for a quieter life. Louisville, seen from the I-65, looks like a sum of bricks. It is. But it's also the sum of everyone who decided to take their own moral bookkeeping seriously. Months later, Charlotte invited me to see her table. It was a small, intimate invitation. I went on a Saturday afternoon. Her apartment was tidy without rigidity. The table stood by the window. On it, a jar of flowers I couldn't name. The air smelled faintly clean. We sat without hurry. Now I have coffee here in the mornings, alone, and I listen to the birds. I didn't know there were birds on this street. She smiled. Outside, a car passed with its music low, unobtrusive. We didn't talk about the building. We talked about the color of the sky, somewhere between pink and gray. We talked about how the city has a way of forgiving you, if you give it time. I could tell the story from another angle, a more furious or moralizing one. I could say Emily is the mirror of an era that confuses visibility with work. I could say family is a system that sometimes uses its most competent member to sweep shame under the rug. All of that is true, and yet it's not the whole truth. I prefer the image of Charlotte opening boxes at a table, aligning papers, reclaiming her name. I prefer the smell of detergent in the laundry room and the poem taped to the door. I prefer the lights of the KFC Yum Center turning on right on schedule while, in a glamourless office, a man in a gray tie uses a burgundy pen to mark the lines that finally align. Emily might falter again. Charlotte might grow tired again. The building might demand more than it gives. I offer no guarantees. But some days, when I stop in front of the Muhammad Ali Center and read, alongside other visitors, the words about fighting clean, I think there was a fight here, not against a person, but against a habit. It was fought with receipts, with refusals, with a new table, with long walks through Cherokee Park. There's no blood in that ring. But there's sweat. And there's a kind of victory that isn't celebrated with cheers, the kind that lets you eat breakfast in peace, looking out the window. The last time I talked to Charlotte about it was near Bardstown Road, as we left a bar where we'd had just one beer each. We walked a bit, and she stopped to look at something I didn't see. "It's strange," she said. "It feels like I paid a debt that wasn't written anywhere." We laughed. Occupational reflex. Invisible debts aren't itemized, amortized, or prescribed. You carry them. Sometimes you inherit them. I stood there watching the store lights and thought about how simple and how difficult everything is. Louisville had earned itself a little more silence that night, the kind that arrives when what needed doing is done, and there's no need to explain it to anyone. We walked to the parking lot and said goodbye without a promised future, the best kind of goodbye. Just to see you, stripped clean of anxiety. In the rearview mirror, as I merged onto the avenue, I saw Charlotte's brick building, a dark rectangle with windows catching the streetlight. It looked neither heroic nor ruined. It looked like something true. Maybe the rest of this story doesn't matter. There will be bank statements, accounting cycles, county notices, adjustments, and small birthday parties. There will be tiny rains that leave the city smelling of iron and bread. There will be new photographs and others no one will post, because there's no one left to convince. What I suspect is that Charlotte's private ledger closed that year in the black, not because anyone owed her, but because at last her energy was spent where it belonged, on herself, not on fixing others. That's all I wanted to say. Sometimes the most decent thing a person can do is refuse to pay a debt that isn't theirs, and then quietly watch the river go on its way, asking nothing of you. And to learn, finally, that some debts are settled with a new table, a well-timed no, and a small pocket of silence that lets you breathe, as if, for the first time, you were calling yourself by your own name.